What's up YouTube, this is Zack Schnepf, and today I'm going to continue my series on advanced post-processing workflow. I apologize if my voice is a little hoarse. I've got another cold, so please bear with me. I'm trying to record this before it gets worse. So in the last episode, I combined the two exposures that I created from the single raw file, and in this episode I'm going to be talking about how I want to remove some of these man-made structures and what tools and techniques that I like to use and the approach that I take to removing those kind of objects. So you can see this is the final version. This is what we're going to be aiming for, and this is where we currently are after combining those two exposures. So let's move to Photoshop and get started. So as the goal for this episode probably implies, this is not a photojournalistic or documentary style photograph. I'm definitely taking artistic license here to take what is already here and accentuate the parts of the image that I really like and speak to me as my artistic expression. So I think that's important to note, and now we can move on. So at this point in my workflow, I definitely like to stop, take a step back, and reevaluate where I am in this image and the direction that I want to go in. So in this case, I've got a pretty clear idea. I want to accentuate those things that I really like about this image. I love the overlapping layers of these hills and how they converge together, this road going through it, this central subject, this tree. But what I'm not so excited about are these silos right here on the road signs and power lines and things like that. For this image, my goal is to remove those things and again create kind of a artistic interpretation of the scene. So let's get started with the easiest part, just getting rid of some of these signs and poles. And the tool I like to use to do that is the spot healing brush. So this is really just a brush that does content aware filling. So what I'll do is I'll zoom into 100% and kind of click around, find those man-made objects that I want to get rid of, click and drag over. Now if you want to, just for your own peace of mind, you can create a duplicate of your background image if you feel the need to kind of have a backup to go back to. I probably won't even bother. I'll just see what happens. So I'll click and drag with that with the spot healing brush here, and you can see it just disappears. That is definitely the idea. So there's another road sign here. So you can see I'm adjusting the radius. I don't want to go too far around it and affect any areas that I don't need to. So I'll just click above it and over it. And as you can see, it does a really nice job of content aware filling or cloning to grab the surrounding textures and fill that area in. Now there's definitely limits to what this tool can do, just like all content aware fill, but it's at least worth a shot. You can give it a try, see what happens. So I'll do the same thing with this sign. Did a great job. Do the same thing with that sign there, the stop sign. And we'll try this power pole next. And it did a pretty good job. I will also do this power pole. I'm going to leave the silos for now. That's a much harder job, but I think I can get this power pole. And it did a little weird thing here. That's totally fine. I'll come back. This is again kind of a rough draft mode for this kind of cloning. There's another little sign and a little trailer on another sign over here. I'll click and drag, and you can see pretty good job. So I'm using the space bar to be able to click and drag around the image while I'm zoomed in. That's a really handy shortcut there. Yep. Whoops, missed a little bit. No problem. Go back and get it. Now this is a little bit more of a tricky area. I'll get the pole first, and then I'll come back for these power lines. And they can be a little bit trickier. So I like to isolate the different objects that I'm trying to remove or to clone out. So again, I'll get this pole, and then I'll work on these power lines. So I'll reduce my radius a little bit, and again, click and drag. And if I had a problem with this, if it wasn't doing a good job, I could use a different tool, but that seems to have handled it just fine. So far so good. It's looking pretty good. And I probably could have used a larger radius and got both of those power lines. I can try that for this set and see what happens. First I want to get rid of this little silo thing here as well. So in this case I'm going to use a little bit different technique. I'm going to load up the Lasso tool. I just used L on my keyboard to load the lasso. You can see you have different selection tools here. With the Lasso tool, what I can do is I can draw a selection around the object that I want to remove, and I can use content-aware fill to try to get rid of it. So let's try that. I'm actually going to start with the Lasso tool, start selecting outside the image area here, and then click and drag in, and then right back out to the edge. And you can see it'll draw a selection all the way to the edge of the image. And when I let go, it'll close it up and create that selection. So with that area selected, you can go up to Edit and Fill. And from the Fill menu here, we want to select Content Aware. And I like to have color adaptation, blending mode normal 100%. So I'm going to hit OK. And you can see it did a pretty good job. It did clone in some of those power lines. We'll just get rid of those in the next step. So I'll go back to the spot healing brush. I just hit J to load that. Again, another shortcut. And let's try to get both of these power lines with this one brush here and see what happens. And a lot of this is trial and error. I don't necessarily know how these tools are going to react or how the cloning is going to go necessarily. I have a pretty good idea just from experience, but I get surprised, or it doesn't do what I think it's going to do sometimes. So some of this definitely is experimentation and trial and error. So I definitely encourage you or anyone to get in there and experiment a bit. So let's zoom out and have a look. So it's looking better. I still see some objects around. There's a road sign here. Let's get rid of that. And another one here. So let's get rid of that as well. And it put a little bit of a dent in this hill, so I'm going to hit it again. And you can see it filled that line in this time. So sometimes going back over an area more than once works really well. So another tool that's really similar to this tool but not quite so automatic is the healing brush tool. It's very similar to the spot healing brush, except you get to define where it clones from. And sometimes that's actually really handy because the spot healing brush, the automated version, sometimes will have a hard time interpreting a scene or figuring out what you're trying to do. So sometimes being able to choose or target the area you're going to clone from is really handy. So in this case, see, we've got this line of this hill back here that I want to simulate or continue to emulate. So what I'll do is I will select right on that line. You target by holding Option and then clicking to set that as the target area. Then I'll move over this little pole, and you can see it gives me a little preview So you can line up the line of that hill exactly where you want. So I'll move over, line it up right where I want, click, and I'll leave this little bottom bit since that'll be easier to do another target from. So I'll target right here. So again, Option, click, then again I'll move over, click, and you can see it clone that really well. So let's zoom back out. And that's most of the road signs and man-made objects here. There's one more possibility. We could get rid of this barn in the background, and I did for the other version of this. So I think I will again. So let's zoom into 100%. On a Mac, I always do that 100% zoom by Alt-Command-0. On a PC, that's Control-Option-0, I believe. Okay, so for this guy, we could just try another lasso. It's kind of a big object. Sometimes the spot healing brush and the healing brush have a hard time. I think I could do it with either one, to be honest. But I think for this one, let's try the lasso tool. So let me load up the lasso tool again, and I will just draw a selection around this barn that's here in the background. And for me on a Mac, I can also, instead of going through Edit and Fill, you can see you can also do that by either Shift F5, or for me, I can also hit Shift Delete, and that will load this up as well. I think that's only on a Mac though. You can look inside the Edit menu and see what your keyboard shortcut is. So again, I want Content Aware, 100%, blending mode normal, and hit OK. And you can see that did a fine job there. There is this little bit of a shadow of a barn as well, so let's draw a selection around him as well. And you can see if I let go early, it'll just complete that selection for me. So that's pretty handy as well. And again, I will hit Shift Delete, or again, Content Aware Fill. Just for reference, you can again go into the Edit menu and just hit Fill, and that will load this dialog box as well. And let's hit OK. And again, you can see that did a fantastic job of cloning that away. So everything is pretty much taken care of now except for the hardest objects, and that is this set of silos down here. So let's zoom in again 100% and take a look, and again try to come up with a plan, because this is a tricky one. It covers so much area. You've got the roads that have to line up. So this is definitely the hardest part of this process. Let me clean up the surrounding area a little bit. I see one more. Whoops, let me undo that. Forgot I had a healing brush, so let me go back to Spot Healing Brush. And let's get rid of little sign there, this little bit here. And I can see when I cloned over here, it created this very obvious clone when you have like two objects that are super similar, a duplicate of each other. I try to get rid of those as well. So for this one, since the spot healing brush is having a hard time, I'm going to use the actual clone stamp. So I'll just hit S on my keyboard to load the clone stamp. I want to make sure that up in my option bar here I have my opacity set to 100. And yep, nice soft edge brush. The clone stamp tool, very much like the healing brush tool. And again, you have to set a target clone area, and then you'll be able to clone anything you want. So for this, I want to clone something that's really similar to this line. I'm thinking just right here, this line where there is no object. So I'll click the target area, I'll move it over here. Again, you get a preview, and I'll click, just drag up and down, and you can see it's gone. It's done a perfect clone there. So I'm going to go back to the spot healing brush one more time, clean up this one last area. That looks good. Okay, and let's get started on these silos. So my plan here is I think I'm going to try to isolate this one silo first and get rid of it, and then try to get the group of silos here. So we'll see how it goes. Again, this is going to be a trial and error kind of a process. And I know there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. This is just the way that I like to do it. I'm sure there are better ways. There's definitely people who are much better at this than I am, but this is the way that I like to do it. So let's try another selection with the lasso tool. I'm just going to select this silo and see what happens here. Now I'm going to refine this selection a little bit because I selected more than I wanted to. If I hold Option or Alt and then I use the lasso tool, I can exclude areas from this selection or subtract from this selection. And so that's what I'm going to do. You can also hold Shift and add to the selection if you want to. So this looks a little bit tight over here on this the edge of this silo, so I'm going to hold Shift and click and just add a little bit to that. Maybe do a little bit more right outside here. Looks good. Okay. So let's try Content Aware Fill and let's see what happens. So I'll go up to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and let's see what happens. Okay, not a very good result, as you can see. But it did get rid of part of it, so that's fine. I'll deselect that. And instead of using the Content Aware Fill, let's go back to the clone stamp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of continue what it started by getting rid of that chunk. And with the clone stamp active, I'm gonna clone this line of this little ridge back here, and I'm gonna line that up. And that looks pretty good. You want to be careful. You don't want to choose an area that's too close, because as soon as you clone over, it'll start cloning the area that you're trying to get rid of and add it back into the scene. That's definitely not what you want, so it's just one of those things to be aware of. So I'm gonna try to fix this road down here as well. So let's clone from over here. It's a nice clean area. And let's line this up. Actually, I might even straighten out the road here first. And I'll move up here as well. And I'll stop before I go too high, because it's going to do something weird up there. So I'll let go. And now let's reclone. And I'll do something close, an area closer. And this is always kind of, when you're doing a tough clone like this, it's always kind of a fiddly process. So that looks pretty good. Now let's work on the top of this silo here. Pretty good. And you can see I'm just filling in areas with like areas from nearby. And that's kind of the idea of cloning. You're cloning one area and duplicating that. I think this is going to look better here. Yeah, so you're duplicating that area to get rid of an unwanted object or create an illusion or whatever you're trying to do. Okay, so pretty good. This is at least a good rough draft point here. I'm going to create a duplicate just for the sake of showing before and after for this hard bit. So now let's move on to this set of 3 silos. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to try with the lasso tool again first, see what happens. So let's draw a selection around the silos. And let's see what happens. We'll load up the content aware fill. And did a pretty good job. I'll have to clean up some of this. You can see there's a weird line here. But that just saved me a lot of work. Yeah, let's go back, show kind of before and after. Yeah, did a pretty good job. Again, I'll have to clean up the road and the lines of along here, but this is a good starting point. So I'm going to go back to the clone stamp tool, and I could use that or the healing brush. I think the clone stamp in this case is going to be a little bit better. The clone stamp does an exact clone of whatever area you're targeting. The healing brush doesn't do an exact clone. It just sets a target area to match texture and light values. Sometimes that's a better way to approach a scene. It just depends on what you're trying to do. So let's try to clean up these areas. I'm going to start with the road first. So let's see here. I'm going to set the target area from here. And again, I'm going to clean up this bit of road first. So I'm going to start right here. And instead of setting my opacity to 100%, I'm actually going to set it to 50%. And I did that just by hitting 5 on my keyboard. This lets me slowly blend in this clone instead of doing it at 100%. Sometimes there are definitely advantages to working this way. And since I already set my target area and I did one pass, you can actually do a second pass and do another 50%. And if you notice, when I click, there's a little X or a little crosshair to the right showing you where it's cloning from. And that's really important. So anytime I start to get close, and that crosshair starts to get close to the area that I'm cloning from, you have to be careful because you'll be cloning the same area that you're working from. This is definitely one of those things that takes a lot of practice. My advice is always to jump right in, just start experimenting, because the best way to learn is to just start experimenting and see what happens. So let's start working on the other side of the road here. So here's my clone point that I want to clone from, my target area. And I'm going to go back to 100% for this one. Let's line up the road here. And I'm just trying to get these two together as close as possible. You can see I'm going to go back to 50% and slowly kind of blend in this area as well. So let's click here and just blend that in at 50% to again kind of create a transition zone because it makes it more believable and helps sell that illusion. And I'll work on this area. So the road's looking pretty good. And now I want to work on this kind of grass hedge or whatever this line is over here. So I'm going to leave my opacity at 50% and I'm going to kind of clone back and forth from this line and this line. So first let's try this one. So let me choose this as my target area here. And then I'll move over here and we'll try to continue that line and kind of slowly get rid of that as well. And because we're working at 50%, we can kind of slowly blend that in. And then I'll do the same thing kind of up here. I'll click and choose my target area and I'll just kind of slowly blend that out so it looks a little bit more natural. Maybe give this maybe at 30%, hit this a few times just to kind of soften that edge so it kind of just transitions out of there. Hopefully once we kind of zoom out, you won't see every little fine detail. So you do the best you can, of course. And again, if you're working at 100%, that gives you a big advantage because the better you can get it to look at 100%, if you zoom out to normal kind of view distance, no one's going to notice. So that's the way I approach it anyway. So it's looking pretty good. I'm going to soften this edge as well at 50%. Let me just choose, this is my target area, and I'm just going to get rid of this line a little bit. Again, just create a softer transition zone. So let's zoom back out. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. You can see that I've removed a lot of those man-made structures that for me were kind of distracting from my own artistic interpretation of this scene. Yeah, so now that we've removed those man-made objects and done the pixel layer adjustments that I wanted to do, the next step will be making targeted changes, tonality changes and color adjustments. So that will be episode 4. Will be adjustment layers, and again using the TKaction panel to help do all these tonality adjustments and accentuate again what I love about this scene, that incredible light and atmosphere. So I hope you enjoyed episode 3. If you did, remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos in this series or other series that I'm producing. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.